Thank you everyone for joining. On behalf of Art Access and the Color Network, I'd like to introduce to you Gerald Brown, who is our curatorial fellow for 2021.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight with some of the artists from the exhibition. We are super excited to kind of talk about what speaking in precision means to them. For those of you who are able to attend the reception, I kind of spoke about my process and coming to terms with that idea, but now this is a cool opportunity to kind of hear from the artists and understand what ceramic and abstraction means to each of them, as well as getting to know their own personal background. So super excited to be here. And before we start, I'll just read off each of the artists' bios to just kind of give you a general gist of who they are, their backgrounds, and et cetera, et cetera. So thank you guys. All right. So first up, Aisha Chantel Bryant, one of my really good friends. I'm super excited. Actually, all of them are my good friends, so I'm probably gonna say they're one of my good friends as I say that. But yes, each of them, I'm very thankful to be working with people that I've kind of casually gotten to know over the years, and I couldn't be happier with this group. So, primarily interested in drowning her Western references and saturated post-colonialistic imagery, Aisha Chantel Bryant, she, her, appropriates the forms of French porcelain vessels as the starting point of her ceramic sculptures. Bryant is a multidisciplinary artist born in Washington, D.C. in 1994. She received her BFA from the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University in 2017. From 2018 to 2020, she attended the post-baccalaureate program at the University of Arkansas within the ceramics department. While there, she organized a student group show, Butter Me Up, at the Sugar Gallery. Her group exhibitions include Gift Edit Contemporary Ceramics at Gallery Urbane in Dallas, Texas, and the 2020 NCECA Jury Student Exhibition in Richmond, Virginia. Bryant currently lives and works in Maryland. Give it up for Aisha. Next up is Leonora Marion Landis, which also goes by Leo. Leonora Marion Landis is an artist and educator based in Philadelphia, PA. She received a BFA in sculpture from Montclair State University and an MFA in ceramics from Tyler School of Art and Architecture. Her work explores themes of identity and anxiety. Give it up for Leo. Dante Moore is a ceramic artist from Mercersburg, Pennsylvania. In 2015, he earned the William D. Davis Drawing Award. In 2016, he was nominated to receive the APSCUF/SU Award by the Faculty of Art and Design at Shippensburg University, where he achieved his Bachelor of Arts in Art. During the completion of his MFA from the University of Delaware, Dante held positions as both studio technician and adjunct professor. Dante continues to manage the University Ceramic Studio while also instructing wood throwing classes at the Delaware Art Museum. He has exhibited work at the Pennsylvania State University, Baltimore Clayworks, Washington County Museum of Fine Arts, Delaware Contemporary, and internationally at the Heit Berlin, Germany. Dante focuses his work around humans and machines. His futuristic work thoughtfully questions the loss of humanity, heart, and soul from the objects that exist around us. His creative process recognizes a concept of removing the hand from the work, exempting the incidental mark. Give it up for Dante.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Daniel Alejandro Trejo. Daniel Alejandro is a queer Latinx visual artist based in Stockton, California, working in ceramic sculpture with an adjacent practice and curatorial projects. He received his BA in art studio and art history from the University of California, Davis. Subsequent to completing his undergraduate studies, he obtained a studio residency at Verge Center for the Arts in Sacramento, where he concurrently taught ceramics to the community as an educational associate. Trejo's curatorial projects include organizing Sacramento Zine Fest and organizing group exhibitions under his collaborative project, Unibrow Collective. The collaborative projects aim to broaden conversations about practices in under-recognized communities in contemporary discourse and provide curated spaces for many voices, experience, and situations. He has recently participated in exhibitions at Mont Vista Projects, Los Angeles, Access Gallery, Sacramento, Gallery 12.26, and Dallas. Trejo currently holds residency at Verge Center of the Arts in Sacramento, California, where he maintains his studio practice. All right, one more round of applause for all the artists. I'm super excited to talk to you guys. As you can tell, these are all well-represented folks out here in the world doing great things. I think what's really important to me, in addition to work with people who look like me and come from similar backgrounds, is that we're all kind of around the same age and experiential level. So it's really cool to kind of push and pull off each other and think about how, you know, we are all responding to the world we live in. So first and foremost, I wanted to just kind of set the precedent with all the artists and just kind of give a general talk about what your process is like and how you have chosen to use abstraction in that making style. Anybody can go first, unless you would like me to choose.
Well, I guess I can start. I don't like being chosen. That makes me so anxious. Well, my making process heavily revolves around research, and I tend to go like straight to like the Met Museum website, and I guess for the Sev-based forms, the porcelain vessel forms in my work, I get really exact measurements and I do to scale things like that and mock-ups. And then I proceed to kind of decide how I want to destroy each one. And then I kind of have that on my studio wall personally. And from there, I kind of make all of these different forms throughout the year, like whether it be plantains, vessels, different things I've worked with before, like chains and cutouts and silhouettes that I can basically use like as collage. And I just kind of do that sometimes in my studio. There at like 5 a.m., just kind of stacking things up and deciding how they'll fall and kind of planning like that. And that's most of my process, actually.
I guess I can bounce off of that. So for me, with ceramic art, I was kind of introduced in the beginning with doing a bunch of functional work. So whenever, I guess, with precision being sort of put into it, I definitely scale out like all of my balls of clay, because, you know, they say if you can throw a cup or, cylinder with a pound of clay, like you're good. But really, I actually use like 1.25 pounds every time that I throw. I feel like 1 pound is like way too small. So, depending on that wall thickness, I guess what you're looking for. And then a lot of times I kind of eyeball things. It's something that I've like learned just kind of doing all the time. That repetition is just being able to like if I cut, a block of clay down, I'm at the point now where it's like I can almost tell you exactly how much clay that is, or close to it. So that's kind of that's kind of where I fall under that perspective, I guess. Yeah.
I guess I can jump into. For me, my ceramic work talks a lot about my anxiety, and it comes from something that is already so abstracted, right? Because it's very difficult to grab your anxiety and make it into an object, right? And say like, oh, this is it. So for me, the abstraction comes from it comes as I'm making it, pretty much. Like I don't start with a sketch. I don't start with like any particular direction. I allow those things to flow. And also when it comes to making it, I need to be feeling a particular kind of way. I feel like when I make it I'm always having those anxious thoughts. It's just part of who I am. My brain works in this weird way. So It usually might start with, okay, I need to make some forms, and I very often also start with color. I'm like, I want to make something with this color, and then I go from there. I also make other work that is not in ceramics, and that is also, I like to think is also very abstract and very minimalist. So
We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that.
Cool. So I guess I'll go next. Yeah, I think I have a really interesting relationship when it comes to making abstract work. It's something that I've always done in my practice. And I think it just comes from a place knowing that for me, it feels that sometimes figurative work is very limited or can be extremely limiting to what I'm trying to conceptualize. And when it comes to working with abstraction or abstract art, I feel like there's way more room for exploration on what can go wrong, what can't go wrong, you know, all these things that you're trying to really hone in. And that's where the whole point of like precision comes into too, because you're trying to think of like all the deficits that are in your practice that will make work that is not as precise or how you imagine it to be. And for me, I spend a lot of time making sketches, and a lot of the sketches are usually preliminary. And I think about composition, and I think about all these formal qualities of like, okay, this doesn't feel right, or this does feel right. And also the color decision too. There's a lot of thought that goes into abstract work that I feel like most people don't really understand that, oh yeah, no, there's actually some, you know, process going on when it comes to making abstract work. So yeah.
Thank you. To kind of follow up where some of you guys are going, and to be more specific about my question is, so I spoke, you know, a little bit about in the statements that I've been writing about and things like that, how there's a certain level of power or agency that kind of, to touch on some of what Daniel was talking about, that artists feel when they're able to work in abstraction. That could be something you do or do not agree with, which is up for debate, but more so with abstraction, speaking specifically, like to even how, you know, Leo and Dante, you guys are throwing. So you're kind of coming at it from, you're saying like, I want to make these objects. And then you're totally turning that on its head and making something different. As well as Aisha, where you're kind of thinking about these porcelain, you know, fine pieces, and then abstracting it from there. What is driving you to do those things, and how do you feel during those process of like making those different decision choices? I think for me, that's the sweet spot that I want to kind of get into first, about like where are you mentally when you're kind of in that decision making process of something that feels like almost a little bit foreign to the eye. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Pulse checking.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, I feel like, you know, whenever I was introduced to the wheel, like everything was like plate, bowl, you know, throw a vase or something like that. And for me, after a while, it was kind of like, okay, I can do this, I can do that. And then eventually, you know, I was like, why don't I just kind of like, you know, kind of throw these forms and then kind of see how they're like talking to me, rather than me being like, this is what you're going to be. So with my creative process and the work that is in the show, it was more or less letting the pieces kind of speak to me. So whether it was using specific tools to do any like surface treatment or things like that. And then, you know, kind of reading how my reaction was sort of in the process in relation to just kind of being like a, you know, a functional artist, and then how the work that I was kind of creating that wasn't necessarily going to be used for functional work. It's like this like push and pull between like the two, like the function, you know, something that I'm, you know, speaking more on like craft and something that I'm thinking about selling versus like something that I know that I can kind of experiment with and, you know, distort. And those are like the two sort of like push and pulls that I have whenever I'm like working on the wheel. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but like, that's kind of, you know, my mindset. And yeah.
Oh, Leo, we can't hear you.
I was speaking to myself. For me, it's a lot about the process. What I seek through the process and what I explore with the process is that it's a sense of control and a sense of calmness at the same time, which is, I know it sounds odd, but throwing pieces and then, you know, putting these big pieces aside without necessarily thinking, oh, I have to make this thing. It's more like, this is what I want to make right now. Like, this is what my body is allowing me to throw. And on the other hand, then I combine them and I cut them apart. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because I throw it in a closed form, it's gonna end up like that. Same as Dante, I allow the pieces to speak to me and when it comes to design and in the way that they want to be taken. So it's essentially that chase for control, which comes into the throwing. It's all about control. So it comes into that, and then manipulating that work, and the dotting is so obsessively. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes it's hard to stop because every time I look at it, it's like, there's more, I can put more, there's more space. So at the end, it's very satisfying to see, you know, the end result. And it's not only just a physical release of like, okay, I got that out of my system. It's also a mental health, I would say, where I can start with, as I mentioned before, when I start making, I have to be feeling a particular way, especially when making these forms. Otherwise, I don't think it would be genuine work for me to make or to put it out there. Yeah, I don't know if that.
No, there's like a sense of like internal response that you're kind of having, exactly, where this is sustaining you and you have to do this thing to like process what's going on. For sure. Daniel, Aisha?
Okay. So for me, since I do start with a defined form, that is something you expect, fine arts, fine porcelain, fine Sèvres work. When you start from that point, for me, I think to myself, like, what are the expectations of the form? What are the feelings people have, especially with many of the discussions I have about my work? There's always someone who like wax poetic about like how much they adore certain, like either the luxuriousness of the form or the scenes or the decorations that they hold of like the fineries, and like, oh, but it's made out of enamel, like it's done with enamel, and they'll like go into the details. I don't know about these forms that frankly, where I start from is a place of like indifference towards them, and how can I change them in a way that like, what do I take away from them, whether it be from the learning. I used to do a lot of video, and from that I got a lot of ideas on how you distort images, how you change things. Like you can have a regular looking picturesque scene, and what changes that scene, like what visual cue do you get from that? So I started applying that to my ceramic 3D work. And I found when you kind of entwine that idea and that motivation with the emotion of indifference, you kind of end up, as like my bio says, like being very intent on like drowning them in whatever you're feeling, like whatever your emotions, or past thoughts that you've had about maybe like the situation with colonialism or different things like that, different themes. Like each piece kind of contains like a snapshot of emotion of trying to understand the different relationships between the objects and cultures and peoples and histories at hand in each piece. Basically how to make something look wrong, but still right in that like you'll still want to look at it.
I like that.
Aisha, I really love your thoughts. Like that was very beautiful and so poetic. And it's something that I think a lot about too, especially when it comes to clay, because clay is just such a, here's the thing, regardless of like socioeconomic background, regardless of what language you speak and, you know, all these cultural differences, you could go anywhere in the globe. And as soon as you tell someone like, I'm working with clay, the expectation immediately shoots to utilitarian work. That is like, oh, they're making a cup, they're making a plate. Right now I'm in Mexico. So I'm used to this Airbnb, like I'm getting used to it right now. But like, that's the thing. It's like, I tell people like, oh, I work with clay. And then like their brain immediately goes to like, oh, do you throw on the wheel? Which I don't know how to throw on the wheel. And it's just like really unusual trying to negotiate that, like that expectation of them, what ceramics is to people who aren't as invested into clay as we are. And then also working in abstract work where they're trying to bring in their own experiences along for the conversation and contextualize it with the work that I'm producing, which isn't wrong. I think it just makes the conversation way more interesting, especially when you're talking to folks who don't work in clay, because then it just sets the concept in a completely different route and it makes you think differently too. Because I feel sometimes for me, I get so zoned in, or like my desire to keep on working with clay gets magnified that I just sometimes don't have the time to step away and reflect on like, oh, what if I start implementing other materials? Like, what if I start turning to soft sculpture, you know, and use like raw clay and then fill up the soft sculpture with bags of raw clay or something, you know, because I really like that you said, Aisha, that you were looking into video and like figuring out how to distort that and everything, because like video is something that I've been really interested in. If anything, it's actually one of my favorite mediums, like video and photography and performance. It's like I love it a lot.
You know, you can do so much with it. And I realized during the time I was doing video, I was also doing like oil painting and ceramics. And I was just like, what am I looking for in these mediums that I'm not getting out of ceramics? Like I was doing like terracotta with only white glaze at the time. And there was like no color, no anything in my work. And then I was like, oh, it's like, this is what I like out of video. Like what you like, like I said, the visual cues you get out of it and the satisfaction of all the change you get out of it. And you can just, and I applied it elsewhere, but videos, you can get so much out of it. I love it.
Yeah, since we're talking about other processes, Dante, Leo, do you guys have other, not do you, I know you do. Can you speak on, can both of you speak on other materials and processes that you use? Because I do think all of you guys, though this show is highlighting abstraction and ceramics, there's a lot of like really great crossover, I think, between other processes you use. Can you two talk about that as well?
I guess I can go first.
I know it's like double dutch, like.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I have done everybody has to do like every medium whenever you're in undergrad. So, whether it's like painting or sort of drawing or, you know, oil, watercolor. So for me, my like main thing I think that I enjoyed the most was drawing, and a lot of that came from like doing charcoal and like Conte, and it was my main focus was like doing portraits, you know, focusing on the body and the figure, and for me with painting, I guess you could say, I focused more on like, you know, landscape, making it as real as I could like do, like the level that I, you know, could obviously create. And I think at some point in my practice, you know, I got to the point where it was like, you know, everybody else around me is like doing, you know, sort of doing the same thing, you know, and how can I like own up to it? So still using like the figure and things, I would then sort of distort the background to like my pieces, all these, or to like my drawings and paintings and things. And a lot of it just came through like, you know, over time, I guess you could say, because it wasn't like a leap or, you know, a jump like right away. So that's kind of how it sort of started. And then I think for me, understanding that process like earlier, because, you know, like when you're a kid, I guess you could say you're kind of slammed with drawing, painting, all those like mediums in the beginning. Like I didn't even touch clay until high school. So I think for me, understanding sort of that process at an early age definitely reflects a lot into my ceramic work now. And whether it was, you know, the background or the, you know, environment that your figure lives in or something like that. I think that's kind of along the lines of where I'm like making clay work, you know, like if you look at my work, you can see the body in there. Like you can see the sort of, yeah, like you can see the body, you can see sort of this environment, I guess that it can live in. So that has not left me. And like, I'm sort of stuck with that, I feel. And to be honest, like, I don't even know how to break that. Like, and I don't know if I should break that, you know, should I keep that? In which I probably will, because that's just how I was sort of structured, I guess, growing up. That's all I know whenever it comes to art. And, you know, if you go back to my hometown and you go to gallery spaces and things like that, like you're going to see, you know, whether it's, you know, the realistic portrait or you're going to see, you know, the realistic, like landscape. Those are the things that I've been shown. So, yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
So I have two different practices. I have my ceramic practice and I have my non-ceramic practice.
Though I see no line.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I think they do overlap with certain things maybe, but I don't know. I keep thinking whether I want those things to kind of merge together at some point. And I don't honestly, I don't know. I'm not too sure. My other body of work, I talk a lot about hair as a political statement. Coming from a culture, I'm from the Dominican Republic, so coming from a culture where curly hair, let me go back. Coming from a culture where anti-Blackness is like very into our system and it's very prominent still. Dominicans are well known for, or beauty salons are very well known for like straightening hair the best they can. And in the Dominican Republic, like having curly hair, I mean, things have changed a lot this last few years, but usually having curly hair, it just meant that like you're not, it's not okay for society because you don't have this like Eurocentric features, you don't have the straight hair, you don't have the mannerisms and etc. So with that work, I use a lot of bobby pins. I use a lot of hair products because, and I always like to tell the anecdote of like me relaxing my hair for the first time, where it's just at 15. I think it should might have been 14. It becomes this kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like an initiation of, oh, you're almost gonna be 15. You are going to become a woman now, and you have to be presentable to society. So your beautiful curly hair is no longer acceptable. You have to we have to relax it and we have to make you fit into these roles. And of course, it didn't take me until later in life to realize like, oh, this is why we do these things, like how problematic that is. So a lot of what I do in excuse me, the materials that I use for that work are things that speak very closely to me, like bobby pins, for example. I think about tubies. I don't know if everyone's familiar with what tubies are, but it's pretty much that process when after you straighten out your hair, you like wrap it up around your head and you just like keep it in place with bobby pins, and that's supposed to keep your hair straight and kind of protect it at night so it doesn't go back to being super curly or anything. And also all these oppressive hairstyles. And I like to use the word oppressive because I feel that when we deny people to just wear their body how it's meant to, how they want, it's oppressive. And denying a part of who they are. So repetition, you can see a lot of repetition in that work and that process of like my ceramic work and how that my non-ceramic work is.
Your work.
I was also experimenting a lot with hair dye and making prints with hair dye and that. But yeah, so I don't know if I answered the question.
No, you amazing. All you guys are just, if you ever, there's a Sharon Dow, just know that I think you're amazing. Okay. Like all of you. And I like that we were kind of like dipping our toes in to talk about other practices you guys kind of like think about or interested in or work with, because I think through all of it, like Dante said, there's a consistent language that is kind of being shared as you touch all these different materials. And I wanted to know, like, how are your own experiences shape? How does that shape language for you? Both like when you actually verbally speak, but like also the visual language that you tap into with these different processes. For example, just, talking about Leo, like how repetition is very important, and that repetitive nature actually acts as something soothing, between the bobby pins as well as the dots. There's like a correlation, or like Dante, there's like the body and kind of the environment that is battling or living in is being shaped, or like, yeah, I'm gonna just go through all, yeah. And then Aisha, like, the way video and movement and like the idea of something being static as well as like foreground, background is being debated, both like when you think about videography, but also the movement of the clays on the actual physical works. And of course, like Daniel, I love the way how you're thinking about actual experiences that you have like tapped into, and the ways not only do they come through in the shapes that you articulate, the colors, but also really like the language of mourning and like grieving, but also joy, being influencing and moving back and forth. So not to like talk for all of y'all, because I did just kind of say the answer to my own question, but I am very curious about thinking about, because I did want to like try to bring people together with different backgrounds and experiences of multiple diasporas, as well as like experiences as underrepresented communities. How is language kind of like shows up in all these different ways? How does it show up, the way you are as a human being, but also in your multiple practices that you guys
have? I remember talking to you about these actually, and how I started working. I got introduced to clay in college. Sorry, not in college. While getting my bachelor's, and that we all know the healing properties of clay and how soothing it can be, and how the process. I used that process and I started working with it. I guess I started concentrating more on it a little bit after my father's passing. I used clay to deal with my grief and to work through my grief. Before that, I was interested. One of the reasons that I started dotting is because I was making these big bodies, these big abstract pieces, and I was writing in them, I was looking for a way to communicate my anxiety. So I was looking for a way to kind of like create a language for it. So looking back into, like writings on caves that we found, and like, well, they were able to figure out a way to pass down like narratives and preserving all these, which to me, I think we could also look at them and think like, oh, were these like their concerns? Were they trying to predict certain things? Anyway, so bringing it back to my work, I started dotting and drawing lines on my body of work as a way to find my language to communicate my anxieties. So when I started working with clay, when I started working with clay through working my grief through clay, that repetition of dotting, that act just became, again, it became my language. It's the way in which it's the chaotic image and the excessive overthinking and the what if. And it's that obsessiveness that comes like with the dotting. So I always feel like the more I pack it, the more I'm saying and the more I'm expressing that anxiety, and the more, doesn't mean that it's necessarily solving it, but that's my language to me. And then moving forward, working with starting throwing pieces and him building other things and like putting them together. To me, that in itself is another language, especially when I'm starting without a particular image that I've drawn or that I've prepped for the work to look like. It's just, it speaks to me. I speak to it in my own way, and especially when I'm frustrated. And it becomes this language, this like way of communicating. In my case, and anyone else.
For sure. As they collect their thoughts, I would like to also add that, Leo, I really do like the colors you use, between the base color of the form and then the color of the dots. And there's like a certain vibration that is happening that also is conveying a language or a mood or empathy with what you're kind of referring to, and how anxiety, grief, joy, all these things kind of are like rubbing against each other as you're like packing on the surface or really kind of communicating heavily on the surface. So.
Thank you. Since you mentioned that, I want to add that just because I am saying that this is what I'm working through in the surface, and at the end, it becomes this kind of beautification of my anxiety. Because the piece, you might look at it and be like, oh my God, but people might look at it and be like, I don't see anxiety. It's so pretty. And it's like, it's not so much about the end result. Sometimes very often it's just about the process. And if the end result is beautiful, then great. And if it's not, that's great too, because it's all about that process. So thank you for saying that.
Anyone else? I promise this will probably be the last general question I'll ask all you, and then I'll ask more specific things.
Could you repeat the question real quick so I can phrase?
Yeah.
No problem. Feel free.
In the right direction.
This is our talk, so anytime you want to say, yeah, Gerald, run that back, I got you. Okay. So I'm curious about how your own personal experiences kind of influence language, as well as like how does that language show up and who you are as a person, and like your own, personal endeavors, family, cultures, things like that. But then also, how does that language show up in your practice, whether you want to speak directly to what's going on in ceramics, as well as like other, because we kind of touched on other mediums and how that language is kind of fluid and we could see it show up. So more so just your understanding of language, how does it show up for you in your practice in general?
All right. Thank you for repeating it for me.
No.
I think as far as experiences that I draw from being from like my family, like Haitian and also Black American, along with Indigenous. My grandmother passed recently, but it was very strange. I think starting my late teens, I kind of got moved out to this general area. It's like one town over. I was the only Black female, actually just Black person in my grade at the time for most of it. So it was like this weird, I guess with the public school system, how we generally learn a lot of the same concepts, especially with history over and over again. I started noticing coming from, I guess where I grew up, you can kind of call it a military area / just more generalized suburb. Basically gave me a very, how would you say, unrealistic idea of like normal diversity. Like it's just normal. I basically never thought about it at all. Like none of us thought about it growing up. And that was very strange to go up and then be somehow like the beacon and authority of all culture outside of a rural farm / I guess like farming magnates, extremely rich area, like weird combination of that out here in Maryland. And realizing that I was like being looked at as like cultured and exotic totally made me rethink my identity in many ways, especially being Haitian, where I think it was like the first time I'd had someone randomly learn that and then ask me if I would like ask me not to curse them. And I was like, huh? It was a lot of that throughout the years. And I wonder why I was ever surprised at a certain point. But kind of being put in a place of such vulnerability and like visibility, like hyper visibility, kind of took me to a place where now, especially my work, I think even now, and like when we were grouping together beforehand, I was like, wow, being perceived, this is not, are we having flashbacks or is this going to be fun? And the different ways that a lot, like during the reception you mentioned in my work, there's like relationships between visibility and like consent, whether it's like relating to people, for instance, like touching your hair without your permission, just coming up to you, where that came from me talking about how people, when I made pottery, people just come up and touch my work immediately and just turn it upside down. I'm like, okay, but I put this in a specific sort of arrangement and you guys are just flipping the plates and looking at them like, yes, they're well trimmed or they're balanced or whatever. But now I think about that is a long linkage of a lot of the same things happening for many years to me. But yeah, being a place of like vulnerability and deciding what gets seen and what I let the audience know, what kind of clues I give, especially when it came to titles. I started using Creole a lot. And most of the Creole I used that I've been using are words that are like collect. If you read it out loud, it's based on a romantic language, just like English. So they're understandable between many cultures. Even if I were to use less accessible titles for, say, English speakers specifically, since I am mostly aware that my audience is English speaking and not multilingual, bilingual, or anything like that. Even if I were to choose titles that they wouldn't understand, for the most part, I'm aware of that. And then there'll be other clues in my work, for instance, like, where are you from? Well, I won't attempt to say it because I'll probably butcher it in Creole because I haven't said it in a very long time, even though my grandmother is here and I should be on top. I've mentally blocked Creole out for now. different things, but kind of trying to distill between many multitudes of cultures and multitudes of identities, different identifiers. How can I distill simple images and simple concepts into something that I guess maybe call it a package. Whenever I have a piece of work, it's like a package that takes all of my experiences, like I said, with consent, perception, being perceived, vulnerability, being in a place where you take up space, owning the space that you take up, all of that kind of gets distilled into like a piece, whether it's a small or, table-sized installation or things like that. Yeah, that'd be my answer.
Very cool. Dante, Daniel. Dee.
I think I'll go next on it because I'm just so, I mean, this is such a wonderful conversation on like the development of language and how our experiences inform the language that we use in our work and also when we engage in these discussions. And for me, I think about like, I try to be cognizant of what I've lost and what I've gained in my, in my experience of just like growing up in California and everything, and then coming from immigrant parents and then Spanish being my very first language. And I actually had this conversation today during lunch about how I have an accent when I speak Spanish now. Like it sounds very Americanized. And I think that was just like a survival mechanism for me because like I spent like the first 7 years of my life only speaking Spanish. And then it wasn't until educators or these authority figures started picking out like these little things of me about how I would articulate certain words in English, where I'm like, wait, something's wrong. I have to figure out how to articulate this better in order for me to be taken a little bit more serious. And then unfortunately, that's just one of the things that's stuck with me. Like I had to use this as a survival mechanism. And it's kind of interesting that it's still kind of like this unspoken requirement when it comes to articulating or speaking about your art. Because like I sometimes see those side eyes or like even those like really quiet judgments when it's like you're having a difficult time talking about your work. And I mean, it is important to talk about your work, but I feel like sometimes the language doesn't exist. It's maybe it just doesn't need to exist at that point. Maybe it just could be represented visually and then that's it. When it comes to my work that I'm doing, I think that these objects are something very personal to me, in a sense that like it's something that I only understand, or it's like somehow portions of me are being expelled into the object. And I'm just trying to like, not necessarily get people to understand me, but at the same time, I really don't care if they do understand me, because I feel like that's how just language works in general. There's like a lot of miscommunication, even with two people who could speak English fluently. There's miscommunication there sometimes. Even with the terminology that we use in ceramics, like dunting and like, all these words.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's just like we're learning a new language, and that's what visual artists in general do. It's like we're just like all developing a language. So, yeah.
I know this might be a little beside the point, but Daniel just said something that really like stuck with me, and it's that I had a conversation with somebody yesterday where they asked me, also you could teach this class in Spanish, or like you could, I don't know. It was like around those, it was something around there. And I immediately just went, I mean, I'm very fluent, but sometimes I'm not. It's just this thing that happens. And when it comes to ceramic, like I've only learned this material and mostly arts in general, really, in this one language. So for me, if I'm not submerged into a space that is going to be, that also speaks the same language, right? Like let's say, if I was surrounded by a lot of Latinx or like Spanish speaking, not saying that all Latinx people speak Spanish, by the way, so I clarify that. But kind of, if I was kind of surrounded by people who like who works in this material and like constantly spoke maybe both languages or just like in Spanish, I would definitely know how to articulate myself and my work or even just the techniques of what I know, right, in that other language. I know it's a little bit side point, but it just really made me,
Oh, don't watch it. That's what's up.
it just really made me think of that because I struggle with that too. And I mean, I grew up speaking Spanish. I grew up speaking Spanish. Like I still speak it, not as often. And it's not until I'm with someone that I know either only speaks Spanish that I realize how difficult it's become for me to like articulate myself, not just in like art wise, but in general. I still can do it. I'm not saying I can't. Just it just you're really starting out to sound like, oh my God, I forgot this word, or um, little things like that. Accent wise too. So people often try to guess like where you're from based on your accent. And it's like you can guess where someone's from based on their accents. Like a lot of people in this country have accents too. So it's not like it doesn't sorry. I'm completely rumbling to something, but it's just I just feel like it's so related. And that comes back to the way that we make and the way that we communicate the things that we try to communicate, because it's just like I do this thing very often where I would say a word. Supposedly, I would say it right the first time, but I'll keep repeating myself and like thinking that I didn't say it right. I'll just like say it one more time and one more time, and I'll stop when someone goes, "You got it right the first time," and it just is. It kind of creates this like insecurity in you, at least in me. Yes, I'm stopping there.
Dante?
Oh, um, I guess starting off, I can just say that I think from Aisha's answer to the question and everything, I feel like we had kind of like a similar background growing up. And for me, with like my language and the work in the show, and maybe some work that I've done beforehand, I think is more or less like using abstract as a way to not necessarily like put my experiences like out on blast and like give it that you know, give you all the information about like what I personally, you know, went through and those experiences personally, and then just kind of how I've like perceived sort of other people in my life and things like that. So I feel like that's kind of been like my battle, is just trying to keep it, I don't know if you could say like simple in a way, and not, because I don't want, you know, someone to look at my work and feel that I'm specifically talking about them or, you know, anything like that. But I think whenever it comes to like family and like friends, I feel this sort of need, because it does affect me personally, because I'm in close relationship with them, to kind of talk on like these topics. And like growing up, I actually was like raised by my grandmother for most of my life, but you know, my experiences that I've had with like my mother at a young age and things like that, it was like sort of like traumatizing for a kid in a sense. And it's like, how can you how can you reflect on that without like making her, you know, feel some type of way, or, you know, this or that. And which, you know, my grandmother always tells me, she's like, well, you know, no one's gonna, you know, listen to you talk or whatever, but hey, it's out there, and at some point, you know, it's gonna be you know, a visual for someone to see or read, you know. So it's like keeping that like barrier in a sense. And that's like definitely what I struggle with. And in my MFA program, like writing my thesis and getting personal, it was like, you know, how do you change, or how do you like talk about the art not only like making it in a sense, you can use like symbolism and things that people can visualize, but like how do you write about that too? And then keep those people from being like named, you know, or something. So I think whenever it comes to like my language in art or just the work that I'm creating is, you know, trying to put my experiences in it, in my relationships with other people, but also like kind of leaving it to not being disrespectful or something, because like I always feel, you know, like everybody has their issues and things, and like I have my own issues, and I like always try to keep it you know, keep it cool, because I don't know. That's my language.
No, for real. I totally agree with all you guys. And I think that, you know, when you boil it all down, what was really important to me about this show is just kind of showing how we all are battling with the power of the tongue, you know, in whatever way that means, how language has been used against us, but also how we will language as well. And, you know, what it means for us to kind of be vulnerable or transparent about our experiences to whatever degree that may be, you know. And I think what's really powerful about that is that like there's no one way to do it. And I think that's what feels really powerful about all you guys being together. It's like coming from, you know, multiple backgrounds and experiences, you know, the common thing that white Eurocentric, you know, heteronormative spaces try to tell us is that like all artists of color, we speak the same language, or that like the way we talk, it's always going to be this one way, you know. And a lot of times it has to be very hyper figurative and hyper explicit. Like I was thrown in a bag out by the side of the road and this was my life, right? Which could be somebody's life, which is no shade to that, right? But it's like the expectation that we have to bear our souls in this very like hyper emotional way that is explicit for everyone to understand is mandatory, right? And if we don't make this kind of work, it's almost like, are we really artists of color? Are we really people who come from these different communities? And I really enjoy how each of you, you know, because all of us have had one-on-one conversations on the phone, and we talked about a variety of things, and I've gotten to know what your work means to you, but also what community means to you. And I think that's what's really powerful, is like that you are the deciding factor. Like, though we may all be fighting for control and the ways in which we allow the work to move through us, like we have the power to articulate ourselves and express what is most important to us, and control what cues we give, what language we give, like how much power we allow the audience to have. And I think that's, to me, my favorite aspect about putting this together. You know, it's like seeing several different, you know, artists work on that, you know, from Sid Carpenter, who unfortunately is not here tonight, who's like a master in the field, who's been doing this forever, seeing her do that, to, you know, us younger contemporaries thinking about how we are on this journey from this point, you know, to specifically kind of get more detailed with this. I want to talk to Daniel and Aisha about, y'all kind of talked about visibility, and I want to kind of dip a toe into that. Like, what does visibility mean? I know each of you have respectively talked about, like, just you and I, like behind, or even right now, what hypervisibility is, and kind of that, you know, and like the nuances or the lack of nuances that we aren't afforded with hypervisibility. And of course, Dante and Leo, you can chime in, but I told you guys that I would do better about not doing this umbrella question for everybody.
Should I go first? I don't know. I feel like Aisha's been going first all the time, so that's why I'm like, oh, I'll do it. No, when Aisha was talking about visibility, it really made me like, it made my heart feel way bigger, you know, like, because it's like, okay, cool, like someone else is thinking about this too, because that's what a lot of my work is about. Like, I'm especially like especially after 2016, like, oh shit, like that was really, really, really intense, where you're just thinking about your own identity and like how much of yourself do you have to shrink, you know, the isms that make you you, in order to like operate in some of these rooms and some of these spaces and some of these institutions, even because there was a lot of performative actions happening in some of these art institutions, right? And all these cultural institutions. And it just, I think about safety, if anything. Like that's the main thing that I'm thinking about, is safety and the lack of spaces, safe spaces, especially in a hyper surveillance state that we're currently in, where, you know, you could get attacked, you could get murdered for all these things. Like for me being queer, it's kind of thinking about like, how does my queerness present in Daniel, right? And then also thinking about like, how do I tone down that? Especially when I'm like leaving a conservative part of California to a more like progressive or liberal part of California, where I'm like, okay, cool. Like I could be a little bit more authentically me. And then it kind of gets a little bit more complicated once you start traveling abroad, you know, because now you're dealing with the socio-political moments of whatever country you're in. Like right here, I feel safe. I'm Latino, but I feel safe here. It's so unusual because I feel like when I'm in the US, I feel like I have to be hyper vigilant, and I always have to keep like, you know, being aware of my surroundings and everything. And then while I'm here in Mexico, I feel safer. And I think it just has to do with a lot of the microaggressions that I receive on a daily basis over there, where you're just kind of already like deflecting it. It's like, okay, cool. Like I'm used to it already, but it still carries some weight. And then sometimes you have to politely, depending on your mood, like sometimes I just don't have the energy to argue or anything, but I just like politely, like, you know, give that reaction. But I think that's what my work is just about. It's just like that. And how do we really think about safety for our own, you know, identity, whether you're like female, you know, non-binary, you know, there's some rooms, some spaces that you just don't feel comfortable in, you know, even if that person is very personal to you or close to you, where you're like, I feel safe, but at the same time, I'm just going to be like, you know, I'm going to have that barrier of protection still. Because like at any moment, that friend could turn on me, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you trust them, but at the same time, you're trying to protect yourself at the end of the day. And I think that sensation of trying to protect yourself just imploded. Like it definitely just like, it started growing and growing and growing after 2016. After the like fucking socio-political upheaval that we had in 2020, that was traumatizing. And I was telling my friend during lunch too, it's like being in the US is a traumatic experience. Like you have to be traumatized as someone who's a person of color, as someone who's Black, someone who's Indigenous, immigrant. Like that is part of this American experience. It's like you have to be traumatized. And then once you go to a foreign country, it's like they don't get it. They really don't understand. You know, I could go on about this like all day. So Aisha, your turn.
No, that's totally real, especially like last year it was like no shade or anything that like oh, would you like to be part of the discussion? I'm like, please, I don't feel safe. Can I not? Like I would like to just watch movies and turn off my internet connection if I could, if it would mean that people could stop asking me about what they perceive as like my identity, what I need to bring to the table. Like, as I said before, like the beacon of, yes, I am your token. I would speak for all of the Blacks and the females, some of the queers, you know.
The ambassador, if you will.
It's like, what do you...
The ambassador.
Like, hello, yes. I wear my, like I have a special hats and a badge, preferably. But yeah, and that's part of like being like all the things I choose when I'm making my work. Like a lot of the things I was doing when I first made Plantains, because last year of my undergrad, I kind of realized I didn't have to make functional work, and that was groundbreaking. That was like, oh, I could just glaze that shut. You don't have to open it. I can hang it upside down if I wanted to. From there, I took a year off between that and my post-bac, and I started making non-vessel based work for the first time, and I started making plantains. And I have to say, a good bit of making plantains at first were very phallic, and I was just like having fun with it. People take me way too seriously, and I'm just like, okay. But at least in the beginning, it was like very phallic and and playing with those systems of power. But wow, like being hyper visible, they expect, I don't know what they expect walking into a room, but you kind of get it really quickly, and you're like, oh, you think my work is like this? If I give you too much, you're going to be out of your depths, and things are to be said that I will simply remember forever. And that will be, as you said, living in this country, traumatized, stamping that in my memory forever. Essentially, that's what I think about with visibility on certain parts. Obviously, I can't hide certain parts of myself, but it becomes second nature to like pull back certain parts. Like I said, like hypersexuality, queerness, anything that like is informing it. Maybe I'm just, I don't know if the word would be sadistic, but I just want to see if people figure things out. A lot of times, like I'm like, yes, what do you think? What are you getting out of this? What is your interpretation? What do you think I should do next? What should I further in my work? Sometimes I just love to hear what people think I should be doing based on who they think I am, what they are perceiving.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, do you think it depends on your mood of like moments when you're like, okay, like I'm gonna be sadistic today, you know what I mean? Or like sometimes you don't have the energy for that. Like, I'm just really curious.
So it really, I think a lot of times I don't have energy because when I'm in if I'm in a block of space, like a post baccalaureate program, I just don't sleep. And people morning classes see me on my way out. And that's just like when my brain works and when I can like come down from the day and like, whether there's sometimes people, I'm not the only night owl usually, but it's where I can, like I say, I make not so much maquettes as in like the final pieces, I literally just lift and I place however I want to. And again, if I'm in the mood for it, I will just make something and just be like, that works. Let's do this. Let's play around with like, okay, I'll put this on top of there. If I put like some nichrome wire, some wire to hold in a piece for to connect two pieces during firing, I'll leave that blank for now and I'll make some objects over here. And when I get back to the studio, when I get back to this piece, I'll decide what goes on that to kind of round out whatever idea I have. So yeah, it really is dependent on my somewhat sadistic mood in the studio. It's all in fun. It's all in fun though.
Sure, for sure.
I think there's something to be said also on what people expect our work to look like because of who we are. And there's nothing that annoys me more than that, where it's like, oh, but you make work that is like minimalistic and black and white. Why is that? Aren't you from so and so? And it's like, so what? Yes, culture, we use very beautiful colors and this and that, but at the same time, it's like, what does that have to do with who I am? And I mean, of course, what does it have to do with how my work looks? Like it's why can't I make like pieces that are like tiny and square and go in a wall space, in a white gallery space? And it's like, okay, oh, so you're not really. No, it doesn't mean that either. It's just simply that I get to choose what my work looks like the same way that a non-person of color can choose what their work looks like. Just because I am, or that, I look a certain way, doesn't mean that all of our work looks the same, or that I have to go within the same themes. Like, oh, but your work doesn't really talk about, your identity or like this and that. And it's like, as Aisha said, it's like we're not this spokesperson of everybody else. Like, yeah, sorry.
No, Definitely.
Leo, yeah, that's something that I've been thinking a lot about too. It's just like something for me, like in my practice, I try to pay attention to what my contemporaries are doing in my own like identity, I guess, like Latinx based artists. Like I try to figure out like, okay, what's being produced, or queer based artists, you know, or like queer folks, like what are they doing? And I try to see like, I don't know, it's not necessarily comparison, but I just try to see where that discussion is going and where the discourse could actually go. And then sometimes I feel like I'm like the odd one out. Like it's like really not that, if that makes any sense.
Mhm.
And I feel like within the community, like within my own communities, I feel like it doesn't, like it's not what's not what it's expected of you, if that makes any more sense. It's like
Yeah.
even your own community has an expectation of you. And then when you don't do that, it's kind of like, okay,
How
what?
dare you
Yeah.
not do that? Yeah.
And then even like for white artists, white curators, for people who are white,
Yeah.
they also have an expectation of you, you know? And then it's just kind of, it's so strange, like just, you know, oscillating between these different expectations. And I think that's the beautiful thing about also working in abstraction, is that it's like bruh, like I'm doing what I want. So
Yes,
you
absolutely.
know?
Absolutely.
I had a question for Dante and Leo about actually questions, and how do questions play a role in both of your process? I think that each of you talked about, you know, the wheel being a part of how you attack your forms, but are not the end. So it's like a lot of, you know, one off the bat questions between the maker, the handmade object, as well as the machine made thing. But then also, like, as you process, you know, Leo, you spoke on like thinking about mental health, and like how do you process your own personal questions to yourself, as well as Dante. I know you really enjoy like shows like How It Works and understanding how things actually are functioning, and go about stuff, and just personally inquisitive of the world. How do questions play a role in some of uh, your making processes?
Feel like I need you to ask me a question to talk about it.
You want me to re-ask the question?
No, I'm
Oh.
feeling like you should ask me a question to then just, you know, like you said, how to, you know, sort of question.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I
Yeah,
can do
so
that
it's like
if you want to.
I feel like we need to play a game right now. Or
Yeah,
something.
I'm down with that if you want to.
Yeah, I'm kind of feel like that's a little tough to kind of reflect on.
Yeah.
Right now.
When you're in the studio, what is more important, the form or the surface? And I guess that's for both of you.
Yeah. I think for me it's like the form, and definitely like diving in and kind of like getting my hands kind of into, you know, the clay, and whenever it comes to surfaces, for me, like it's kind of I wouldn't say it's like a last minute decision, but I definitely like to make first and then figure out how the glaze is going to fit to, you know, the piece. And I think, you know, talking back on like language and things like that, like your ceramic work does talk, like, at least for me, like it talks, like in a sense, it's like, I sort of need to be this color or like this, or, you know, whatever. And if you're, you know, thinking more along the lines of like content and things like that, I think the color kind of comes out in that sense too. So color is definitely like a last minute decision. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I'm froze right now, but
Totally. I have another
yeah.
follow-up question to that too. So
Go ahead, get that.
Okay, I'm gonna throw this out there now,
Yeah,
and then Leo, you can answer both.
Yeah.
How does perfection and or curiosity play a role in the process as well? So it's kind of like turning questions on its head, like how you grapple with like something being designed to make repetitive, perfect shapes, such
Mhm.
as a wheel, but also being playful and curious and being
Yeah.
a little bit sneaky.
Yeah.
And also Daniel and Aisha, y'all can jump in at any point as well.
That's interesting that you say that. So for me, like in my process, I definitely, I try to be precise with like everything that I kind of start out with. But once I get tired in the process, I think all of y'all know what I'm talking about. Like once you get tired, you're just gonna be like, I'm gonna hit this there, like do something that you normally wouldn't do. So like that's like where I'm at, and where I have been, and I think it just kind of leads to new discoveries because we're like all like me, I'm like stuck in this bubble, like if you're gonna draw something, you're gonna draw it how it looks. If you're gonna paint something, you're gonna draw it how you see it. Like that's me. And it's interesting thinking about this because like in grade school, whenever you're being elected in history class or like math class or something like that, even art class, it's like you're always told sort of what to do. And for me, when I'm not like doing the things that I'm told to do, I'm over here just like creating lines on my sketchbook, doodling, like doing all these like sort of things that I feel is like an impulse. And those impulses are now like what I'm sort of like kind of reflecting on. And it's not necessarily like, reflected on what I was always told or what you're supposed to do, or, I haven't changed my looks though. So I still kind of like look the same. But I'm working on that. Not really. But
Dye your hair,
it's
bro.
like, I know, dye my hair or something, but like, those are like the moments that like I sort of embrace. And I think, Leo, I believe, talked about, how people like perceive your art to like this is how it should look like or whatever, blah blah blah. And it's like, I had somebody tell me like, oh, you're making art about being Black, like that's pretty typical. And it's like, what? Like that experience to me was like hold up, and when and it's kind of like where do you sort of draw the line? And I think this is for all you guys in this group, is just like, how does if you've had any experiences like that or whatever, like how do you go about that? Do you make your work kind of like slammed in the face, or is it you're sort of using abstract as a sense to kind of like, if the the viewer looks at it, you want them to sort of like spend this time with it and kind of understand it, or do you want it to sort of be like a literal sense? I mean, I guess it's not going to be literal because it's sort of it's abstract, but how can you still slide that in there without the viewer? And do you even want to do that, to be honest? Like, should you be upfront and speak yourself and be yourself? But like, that's like issues that I think that we all go through, so yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, kind of all over the place.
No, I loved it. Thank you. Did everybody also understand the question? I do want to jump to Leo, but
Yeah, go ahead.
The question was clarified in case
Yeah.
you got it.
I might have to write it down here, maybe.
It's all good. Do whatever feels good to you.
Yeah.
All right, Leo.
I kind of forgot the question.
No worries. So I'm just curious about how questions play a role in your practice. And I asked a few questions. One was like, which comes first, surface or form? And I think you talked a little bit about that. And then the second two-part question was like, how does perfection and or curiosity also add or impact your work?
So when it comes to questions, I think more of my work, my ceramic work, is a lot about self-assessment. So it's just these questions, but it's like, are you okay with this? Like, how are you feeling? Like, how are you Um, how are your hands doing? How are you? I don't know how. Yeah, just a lot of self-assessment and questioning me about what I want to do and what I there it's, when I'm making things, it just feels like I'm in this, and I think we all share the same feeling maybe, but it just feels like everything else kind of like mutes out and you're just into doing the thing. And sometimes you start asking, at least for me, sometimes I find myself asking more questions about movement and how I want to place things as opposed to asking questions of, I guess, more critical, like bigger questions outside of that. And I think I do that because the work, as I mentioned before, like this particular work, when I do it, I have to be feeling and I have to mentally be in a particular space. So um, it's very intimate for me. I know our work is very intimate to all of us, but for me, it's kind of, I don't, when I make it, I don't always make it with the intention of showing it. Actually, I don't think I ever really make with the intention of showing. It's for me, right? And I'm happy to share those things, but at that moment, that becomes like the main subject, like the main thing in there. When it comes to form and surface, I have a hard time separating those two. I don't know what you mean necessarily, but like surface and form. Do you mean like decoration wise or just?
Yep.
Yes, right. So for me, it's hard to separate those things because I think that form speaks to you and how you should be and how it can be painted or how it can be or how it wants to be. Sorry, I got distracted. Or how it wants to be represented. Like, okay, I do have the form, but then what? And sometimes I start with a color. Sometimes it's like, I want this color. So I'm going to make a form and I want to put in this color. But because of my work in particular, having all those different forms put together, right? I have to think about, and then I'm dotting, which it is very challenging to do, especially in spaces that are like very tiny, right? I have to think about, okay, which areas need like slightly bigger dots or like slightly like smaller dots. And then when I come in and try to do, I don't know. I just think that it's hard to separate those things. And when it comes to perfection, I think it goes back to, again, the comment that I made earlier about that thing where I do look back at the work and I'm like, there's so much space. I could put so many more dots. And somebody else might look at it and just be like, are you crazy? Like, he's done. Like, where did you see such space? And I'm like, look right here in this space. I think for me, that's like the perfectionist part, which is ironic because at the end is I mean, it's so much more about the process, right, than what it looks like at the end. But to me, it's like I didn't back it enough. I didn't, yeah. So there's that, and I feel like it was another question that I didn't answer.
No, I think you hit everything.
Okay.
I would like to. I only have a few more questions left, so I would like to turn it over to the audience. I can close out with my questions. Anybody in the audience have any questions for anybody on the panel? Feel free. You can just unmute yourself and kind of just say what's up. I promise we don't bite. Not to speak for the artists. They have their own autonomy. Sorry, can you just watch me do my shoulder, rolling shoulders?
It's very relaxing.
While the audience gets it. Oh wait, does somebody have? What's up, Josh?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Hey,
You look great.
I am sweaty in my studio, so I didn't want to expose everyone to that. I don't know exactly what I've just really so enjoyed listening to this conversation, and so thank you everyone for just Yeah, just it's been a great conversation. For Gerald, I'm kind of curious, and I don't know what the question is, but abstracts. There's like this, you've talked about the kind of dissonance between abstraction and precision, and in my mind, there's something about specificity in there, and I don't know if you've thought. I guess I just am curious for your thoughts on specificity in abstraction. Like, how can you be specific and abstract at the same time?
Ooh. I actually want to toss it to the artist because I feel like I will talk forever about that, but I want to make space. And wherever y'all leave space for me, I'll join in. But I really want to hear that from you guys, because I feel like we talked about this on the phone so much, and I want you guys to shine.
I feel like that's a loaded question.
I can like get the ball rolling, and then I'll tap myself out. For me, I think there's immense amount of specificity within abstraction, because a lot of times whenever you choose to, make a mark, there is somewhere, whether it's 50% or 1%, there's a level of intention that is happening, whether you are aware of it or not. There's some level of intention. It can just be a feeling. It can be something that your arm was itching and that's where it landed. There's something that was kind of slightly or, heavily orchestrated into where the mark was made. And over time, I think when thinking about larger ideas, both whether it's personal or global, there's ways in which you can move amongst the spectrum of like how noticeable that intention is, and I think using these lovely artists as an example, I think each of them kind of plays with some of those cues or nuances in terms of that level of intentionality. I think that, when you're working more figuratively or something that's more literal, you can be almost 70 to 99% intentional about this is what is happening, right? But I think as you dial back with abstraction, you still have some of those same key features, but now the artist is being highly selective about what the audience is picking up on or what is not being picked up on. So I think selectivity or precision for that matter becomes less about audience accuracy of understanding and more about the consideration that is being taken by the artist. If you want to even pull on, Jackson Pollock, right? Which we're not going to spend lots of time on a white man in this space, right? But somebody who is casually throwing paint across the surface, that can, to the naked eye, feel like that there's no intentionality. But yet, even within that space, he's picking up things in a particular order or even allowing emotions to wrap around that. So when you bring artists like these lovely four in the room, who I think have a more precise and vivid content to be shared, I think intentionality becomes even much more visible than somebody like that. You can start to see even like what Aisha is talking about with like movement and glazed chemistry, right? Or even Daniel, who is carefully constructing these outlines. And even like, okay, not to spend too much time on this, but like, I remember when Daniel and I were talking about the thickness and like how the thickness, both when you see the actual shape, what thickness of the line you're seeing this way, but also when you turn it to the side, what thickness you're seeing as the actual strip that is creating the band, I think there's an immense amount of just consideration is being made. And I think sometimes selectivity is often tied to audience understanding, which is not inherently like the same thing. I said I was going to be shorter and I just kind of jumped the gun.
I'm like, I really want to say something. It's just
No,
like,
go. This is y'all show. Go.
no, it's because that's a really beautiful question. It's something that I like to think a lot about. And I think one of the things, like in life, I don't think things necessarily exist on binaries, like one or the other, right? Many things in life don't exist like that. You could be happy for someone and you could also be jealous at the same time. For abstraction and precision, I feel like in my own personal work, there's an intense amount of editing that goes on in my work, especially with the forms that I'm making. The forms need to feel compositionally right to me. Same way that it happens when someone who's a musician is trying to, try out some new tunes or something like that. There's like a great amount of editing that goes on where it's like, okay, this doesn't sound right, but this does. And then you keep on adding it to your bank of information that you keep collecting along the way. And then that keeps informing your next body of work or the next thing that you're going to keep on doing. And I think there is a moment where you start deciding like, this is how it's going to be. This is how it needs to be. This is the color that it must be. Because if this sculpture was blue instead of yellow, it wouldn't feel right. Like, and it's also thinking about weight and also the formal qualities when it comes to color too. Some colors are heavier than, other colors, or they have that perception. So there's this whole like psychology to it too when it comes to working with abstract work instead of working from the literal. And the unfortunate thing about sometimes working with the literal, it often creates a pitfall where we anchor ourselves and start creating this like conversation of like, it has to look like the thing that already exists in this universe. If I'm making an abstract chair, it has to look like how a chair already exists in this universe. Versus working with abstract work, we're creating our new language. We're creating new works that really don't exist anywhere except for our brains. And we're trying to emulate our thoughts and our emotions outward. And we have to honor that. We have to honor that our thoughts, emotions, and everything are true. And there is some truth to that. And even though these feelings are kind of yucky, or maybe they're just really difficult to understand, doesn't mean that like it's not precise or anything. So I think there's just like a lot when it comes to abstract. Like I feel like it's just coming from a place of misunderstanding when folks think that like, oh, you're just making squiggles. That's all you're doing. Like it's so easy. Oh, you're just putting things together. That's it. Like that's really effortless. But in reality, in our studio practices, like I'm sure that we just keep making these multiples or these versions of something. Some things are like, okay, I'm going to show this, but I'm not going to show that. Or the thing that you don't want to show is the thing that everyone really enjoys. It's like, wait, why do you like that? That doesn't make any sense. So I think that like there's this negotiation that happens between the creator, which is us, and also the viewer, which is like the audience that we're trusting with our work, to try to see where their thoughts lead them. And then hopefully they'll just create this more dynamic dialogue that keeps continuing to inform our future works. I think it's very important to have abstract art. I think it's just something that's very limitless.
I think when it comes to, I think materiality is also important. Like the materials that we choose to create our abstract work is very important. And I think to an extent, that's why as I said earlier, have these two practices, and I'm not sure whether they like match in there or anything, because I think same as Daniel was saying, we go through the process of elimination and like the trial and error. It's just the editing that goes on. I, for example, sometimes, no, for example, and not sometimes, I work with bobby pins, and that's something that's just like very mundane object that even if you've never put one on your head, you've definitely seen one in your house somewhere. You've definitely see it maybe in the streets, just like, or like any other kind of like hair, like hair objects. Like you tend to see these things on the street. So studying that, okay, I want to talk about this particular subject and finding like what would be the object that could invoke, to my understanding, right? Because I don't know how I can control what other people see in the work. So choosing that exact material or object, and I'm going to say, there's a lot of trial and error. Sometimes I might think like, oh, this water bottle, everybody will understand what I'm trying to talk about. But it can just go into the lack of access to water at the same way that it could go into, oh, it's a water bottle. Are we talking about pollution? Are we talking about this and that? So when we choose materials in that and techniques too, I think that's also very important. How we choose to make the thing or what we choose to make the thing. It's I think that's where the precision comes in abstraction. You have to be very precise, or try to be as precise as you can, so that a message or having somebody creating like a spark on somebody that would say, oh, even if you're not seeing the work as hair as a political statement, or like clay as a soothing material, maybe if you it could be something that you're like, oh, you know what, my mom used to wear these things, I remember them. Or like I don't know, your partner like had these things all over the house. I have no idea what they're for, but still, it's like something that you connect to somebody and the way how they use it. Does that make sense? Anybody?
Mhm.
Okay, great.
So I guess like in my work, maybe out of the group, mine is the closest to being kind of towards the more representational in some respects on the spectrum. If we're talking about spectrum, if we're using it as a binary,
It's a
it's not a
circle.
binary.
It's a
It's all a
circle.
circle. It's all like nonsensical. But for me, the precision comes in choosing what to abstract. Like if I make the decision, a lot of times I made a decision to juxtapose really rich greens that are green glazes that are running, that are dripping off of forms, obviously frozen in place after cooling down from being in the kiln. But I'll make the decision to have that and juxtapose it with a white form or like a blank form, or taking a form that mirrors, say if I had this kind of shape vessel, and then I have the same shape but as a flat cutout to communicate the superficiality of the form, to reduce it down to a superficial representation of itself. As I said before, like taking aspects away from it that are deemed key or important to it and identifying it, to making it unrecognizable and changing its form into something else completely. I think that's how, in my work at least, precision and abstraction comes from a lot of choices I make, whether it be color, form and flattening and deflating forms, and whether or not, like I said before, like things are on show or whether or not they're hiding. And that's how I choose what to abstract very precisely.
Okay. Did everybody talk?
It's okay. You can't answer the question. I don't want to pressure. You could jump to
I feel like I can answer. I think for me, like being specific kind of comes in like the making process, and sort of like what the pieces that I have in the show, just kind of understanding like how they're all like gonna fit sort of together. You know, if you have this like small cut piece or something that I'm trying to like fit, squeeze it in somewhere, obviously I'm gonna have to be like specific and maybe like alter it a little bit to get it to fit. So whenever it comes to being specific in a sense, I think the making process comes out of that. And then also with like the glazing process, I mean, you can sort of make it or break it or leave it exist as, how it sort of is. So for me, even whenever it comes to like surfaces and things, I think being specific on, whether you're making like test tiles or I think all that like falls into just like what that piece is, you know. So being specific for me is that. And then whenever it comes to the abstract side of it, is just kind of how it all sort of works as like a whole. If you look at my work, I think it might be like it might seem like it resembles something in a sense, because I have these like organic forms that are like intuitive, that represent the body, and then I have these like sort of mechanical forms that are represented from just kind of everything that we see, I guess you could say. And it's sort of all intuitive, but in a sense, like you can sort of look at it and be like, oh, that sort of looks like this. But I think as it all sort of comes together, brings that like abstract, and by looking at it, everything being so like tight and so clean, and you know, that's where it sort of pulls in being specific, but then also like being abstract as a whole. And I feel like I'm repeating myself right now. But yeah, it's like, those are like the two sort of, like, that's how I look at it at least. And then, yeah. Check.
That's all good. It's all good.
Yeah.
No, thank you guys. We have a question from Matt. A question for all the artists: how important is control? Also, first, thank you so much, Josh, for that amazing question. From Matt, a question for all the artists: how important is control, and how important is discovery? Useful to have control, or to be able to be surprised?
I think I can start answering that. I think a lot of my work, specifically the dotting in my work, is about control. It's about trying to control these thoughts, right, and these feelings, and like how it's very important to me to have control over that surface, not so much necessarily over the object, but the surface in particular. I think the rest of the question is, I think clay in general tends to surprise you in a lot of ways, especially in moments where you're like, I don't need any surprises, please, just don't. Just like go the way that I need you to go. But at the same time, by allowing, depending on the process, right? I think Dante and I have established that we start a little bit more like from non-drawings. Dante, correct me if I'm wrong, please. So I think that having that, starting from that when it comes to the form, it is a lot about discovery. And like, what happens if I do this? And like, what happens if I do that? And I think, at least for me, I think those two are important, and like they go kind of hand in hand. So it's this idea of kind of like seeking that control, but also letting go of it and have it all together in space. I don't know if that made any sense. I think for me in particular, having control is, you know what, I don't know. It's
Okay, nice to know.
yeah, I think it depends on the work I'm doing at the moment, how much control it's I need of the material and of the process in general. When it comes to, my work specifically talks about anxiety. So part of anxiety is that need of control, and like wanting to find out like what happens next, and like being able to prepare for what comes next, and the what ifs, and all the crazy what ifs that we can think of when we are in, at least when I am in certain particular state of mind. So I think it's important. I think it's important to me in my process, and I think the surprise is the end result. And if the surprise is the end result, then that's important because it would allow me to see what comes next and how else can I grow the work and the forms, or how else can I experiment with these things. Yes.
Thank you.
I think since my work is usually is in the framework of the relationship concerning post-colonialism, control plays a really large part in my practice, especially since it's about reclaiming agency over the subject matter. So for me, I would say if I could separate it between maybe surface and form, the form is very controlled, and the surface is more of a surprise. Like I do test glazes because I don't want to destroy anyone's kilns, but the overall end result is usually a surprise and an exploration into how different surfaces change the relationships of the forms. And I make a lot of discoveries along the way, like whether or not something works, like quote unquote works, and that can be defined as if it makes sense to me, like thematically, or if maybe it's just something that's going too far in the direction of just wanting to just ending up with something that looks pretty or something, and maybe it looks there's no substance to it. Yeah, not for me. Like Leo said, like the end result ends up being the surprise, and I tend to control very much the lead up, and then whatever happens in the end is kind of controlled, but it's usually a surprise. And it's all about the choices.
I just want to clarify, when I talk about control in my work and like the dotting, I'm referring to trying to gain control of those thoughts, right? And like that anxiety and controlling situations that I have no control over. So that's the whole point. I can't control people, so I have to I concentrate that into my work. And I mean, yeah, that. Thanks for the question, Matt.
Daniel, Dante, did you want to have something to add? Nope.
I
No
do.
pressure.
I definitely do.
No, do you do?
Because I feel like I've been like thinking about this for a while. How important is control? For me, I think like control, to be honest, can sometimes be like really limiting. And for my practice, at least, it's like I feel that I'm not making new discoveries if I like have too much control. You know, I'm not giving myself that time to kind of like experiment or, you know, have these like trial and errors and kind of learn from that. And so I think, you know, the pieces that you guys actually see in the show, I can tell you that there's a bunch of imperfections in that. You know, you can, and you gotta almost see it in person. Maybe if you can like zoom in on the, you know, the photos. But like I have no control over where I'm attaching pieces together. You know, there might be like some subtle cracks or like pieces from the firing kind of like separating. And I think having that sort of like, you know, incidental mark to me is great in a sense because it, like I reflect that on just life in general, you know what I mean? Like we're not all perfect, you know, and this world's not perfect. And in a sense, we have all these sort of like tools and things to kind of make us feel sort of that type of sense, whether it's like what we post on social media. I feel like I'm getting deep right now, but like what we post on like, you know, social media and everything, like we have control of that. You know what I'm saying? But like whenever we walk out of the door, like we don't have control of any sort of sense, anything that's like, you know, gonna hit us by surprise. And for me, whenever it's like the making process, it's sort of how can I, you know, accept these sort of things that are like happening in my work that I had no intentions of even having happen. So between like the two, I think having a little bit of control, having a piece that is like functioning and existing and being able to be put in a gallery space or wherever it exists in, I think that is like the greatest thing. But also like, you know, sort of those surprises and the things that we're not expecting, because that to me then is something that gives us the opportunity to, you know, to learn from, to elevate from, and to kind of think and compare and contrast and like do all these decision making, I guess, to just exist in a better sense. That's kind of where I fall. Yeah.
Sweet. We have our last question from Jonathan. Another question for any of the artists: how do you think through your use of color on the surface of your work? Do you create your own associations / logic with certain colors, or do you draw a common experience that is part of the larger societal association? Good question, especially as someone who uses color a lot.
I'll go with this one, I guess. Yeah, I go through a lot of editing when it comes to color or choosing which color feels right for my sculptures. It could go from like exploring 7 different types of pink and figuring out what feels right for that specific form. And it's also just like thinking about what colors are also in right now or like very popular. I like to look at a lot of fashion magazines when it comes to it. The work that I started making it in the mid 2010s. So that's when colors like millennial pink was just being talked about like everywhere. And then all these stores were very pastel and everything. And there was something that I was realizing in like the field of ceramics where I felt that there was just a lack of pastel colors in the works. And so one of the questions that I was trying to ask myself is like, how do I introduce a more colorful palette into my sculptures without making it seem tacky? Because you could definitely easily ruin a piece once you start applying the wrong color or the wrong design. Like the form looks great, and then once you glaze it or you start applying underglaze to it, you could completely ruin it, especially like knowing what the kiln does or what it can't do. And then that's also the control element to it too. It's just like understanding that sometimes the kiln will behave differently than you imagine it to be. And then that's why you always do test tiles, or people do test tiles so they could like reduce the blow to it when the color just doesn't turn out right. There's like a lot of planning that comes to it. For right now, it's like I've been thinking a lot about like neon colors, you know, with Billie Eilish, like wearing that neon green. And then I've been seeing a lot of neon colors everywhere, like fluorescent orange, fluorescent green in fashion too. It's just something that I've been thinking about, and how the fashion industry kind of works with the visual arts, and then how that also informs society in general. And it's just like the cycle of it, and how we're all participating in it, and how we're all just in different fields, and how one affects the other. So that's how I kind of manage my color usage.
You know, it's funny, you just said that, and the first thing that came to my mind was The Devil Wears Prada. Because I think there's that scene where, you know what I'm talking about? Where
Cerulean blue.
they talk, where they talk about it, and she really explains like, this is how it works. We say that this color is in, and it just, I don't remember the scene. Like,
And a year later, you have a
Precisely.
turquoise belt.
Yeah, and you think that you just casually picked that up when it was already picked out for you.
Yes, I thought of that. So I think for me, it's a lot of societal association. Now that I think about it, it's funny to think how like we think of like gray meaning a like calm mood, or blue meaning that you're sad, and red some people might see as like passion, or like, I don't know, like these kind of things. I like to work a lot with colors that um, one, work well together, and two, that will kind of like fight each other when it comes to the dotting. And what I like to do is that I also sometimes like use a color that has nothing to do with that. Sorry, Spanish word just came out. Um, I would use a color that it's not in the palette that I've been using, and just pop like random, I don't know, like purple in a yellow background, just to use it as an example. And then it's kind of like a little Easter egg of, oh my God, there's like this one dot here of like this one color. When it comes to glazing, I do not like to do. I also do not like to glaze my work. I think that when it comes to sculptures, especially when you're making like intricate forms and shapes, if you're not really thinking about how you're applying the glazes and like how things are gonna fall and how they might drip and all that situation, you can really ruin a piece. I think sometimes the shininess of, and I'm saying that all places are shiny, FYI, for those that really love glaze. I'm just saying that I feel like sometimes it can kind of make things really flat when we don't really know how to play around with those particular colors and those textures. Because for me, I like work that has texture, whether that is like super like smooth, but sometimes surprises me when I like hold something. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't expect it to feel so soft like this. Like how that to me is very interesting and intriguing. And my work is all about texture. I mean, I use underglaze and I come in with a precision applicator and I just go da 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 da. And at the end of the day, it's like it's velvety and it's exactly the color that I want, except that it's just slightly it's like darker, as we know what happens when you're working with underglazes and they go to the firing. And so yeah, like color and texture for me, and like having that visual contrast is important. It's very I try to be very intentional with that. I don't know if that answered your question. I hope it did.
Yeah, so for color for me, I definitely, since the majority of my palette is greens, I did a lot of glaze testing in the beginning of developing this body of work, and also referencing video work. I love working with green screen and like how unnatural that green is. And I kind of just went to town with pigments to try to get a green or palette of greens to work with that were slightly unnatural in certain ways, whether they're too, I don't know how you say, like muted in a way that you're kind of like, you look at it and be like, is that doesn't seem like that, or wouldn't be a healthy plant or something. Or they're way too neon in a certain way, but they're not quite like green screen green, too obvious. And that just is playing with the lushness of the Caribbean, which is a lot of my work. Please. Sorry, my cat's trying to jump on my computer. Gosh, what was I just saying? The lushness that is associated with the Caribbean and the colonies that were obviously exploited for the resources they have. And even now, when I hear my grandmother talk about like Haiti is the richest country in the world based on resources, because it's considered like the materiality is still like the center of that identity. That's what I tend to blanket all my work in, is that same like lushness that's slightly wrong. And also within that, I used to use like just a glossy plain black, but I switched to like, if you see my work in person, it's a slightly metallic black, or actually I call it mega metallic is the label I have. I labeled that recipe, and it's very metallic, very wrong, especially when it mixes with the green and all the like you get plumes of cobalt blue throughout the glazes when they run and things like that. So for me, I'm always looking to make it, as I said before, wrong looking.
Which if you ask me, anytime I use glaze, I feel like it looks wrong. To me, it's like, it's very easy to do. When you're not intentional. Are you looking for a cat trying to jump still?
Dante, do you want to touch on color? I feel like your colors are pretty specific, though they don't feel like the most like they look more like they came from something from the environment versus like applied.
So in the show, I have these like kind of black like wall sort of pieces, and they're, I guess you could say, like sort of matted on the wall with this wooden structure behind it. And to me, those pieces at least kind of reflected like my charcoal and Conte drawings, just kind of working in black and white. In person, that surface actually looks like it kind of made the clay surface look like it's like plastic, because I actually didn't glaze those pieces, and fault me if they should be glazed or if they shouldn't be glazed, but that's just my decision.
I'm not a purist, it's okay.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So whenever it came to those pieces and the decision making, like color to me is kind of pulling from the environment. So whether it's, plastic or the middle piece, if you guys look at this, you'll be able to see it, but the black sort of intuitive structures, and then there's this like sand color piece in the center. That piece is ceramic and it's covered with sand. And, drawing, from the environment. And whenever you go into the other pieces into the show, I think for me specifically, like weathering is a term that I like to use. Something that I think we all could probably experience from is just, with life in general. Like I feel like over time, like obviously I'm getting old, but then also, your mental state and how you deal with things sort of changes and stuff, but it's sort of subtle. It all, I think from that point, maybe from A to Z or whatever, you have that blend in between. So blending those colors are sort of important to me. And like, I'm definitely down with like rustic colors and sort of these charcoal colors and things, because it definitely like reflects on just life in general. And seeing that show, seeing sort of like how we all sort of change. Yeah.
For sure. No, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for your question. As we get ready to close out for the night, I just have one question. It's more of like a lighthearted question for the artist. Is like, with all of you guys being so young and at different parts of your practice, where do you see your work? If it is going to continue to still be abstract, where do you see it potentially going?
Well, not to answer first I'm sorry, but gosh, I've definitely, especially getting prepared for this panel, had more time to sit down and really think about where my work was going, and being home and with my old work that came before it, especially, I definitely see my work probably getting first again talking about the circle, the nonsensical circle line.
No,
that
it's not a line, it's a circle.
representational, and abstract. I am definitely heading away from defined forms and just having not maybe being less sadistic and just having more fun for myself and not thinking so much about what people are getting out of what people understand of my work. I've learned a lot about it by making it and by having critiques and discussions about it. And I feel for me, it's like I'm definitely like moving into another direction in some ways.
Sweet. Thank you.
I think for me, this particular body of work, and when I'm referring to this particular body of work, I'm not talking about the pieces with the birds, because those are kind of where it started, and the other ones are more like where I'm at. I think that it's still very new to me. I think that I'm still. Everybody hear me? Okay. I think it's still very new to me, and I think I'm still. I think I'm just gonna keep pushing it and see how else it evolves. You know, I'm happy where it's at. I'm definitely in no rush of. Let me go back. I think sometimes when we talk to people about our work, there's often the comments of like, well, you could do this, or you could do that, or it could be this and that. And I feel like sometimes like we don't want to hear those things. At least me, you know, where it's like I feel like it is so new for me that I'm still just in that stage. And I'm not saying that I'm not always thinking about what else can I do and like how can I change it, but I just like to see the process. I just like to see where the process takes me, and I don't necessarily have a plan for that, or see how much different it might look like. I mean, I'm interested in seeing where it takes me, of course, and like what it might look like in the future, knowing where I started and where it is at. But with this particular series, I feel that it's just so new that I don't know. And I'm okay with not knowing. For once, I'm okay with not knowing.
That's what's up, bro. D&D.
Yeah, I really don't know where my work is going after this. I'm finally finished with the series, or I think that I'm over it. I think that once you just keep on working on the same, not necessarily concept or aesthetic, but once you just keep like entertaining the same thought over and over and over again, it just becomes very dry and it gets boring to you yourself, even though for some other folks it might seem really exciting still. And I think like for me, I think of it a way of how like singers probably like get told to sing that one song over and over and over again. It's like, oh yeah, like you're known for that one song, you know, but they want to go back into the studio and make new work or like new music and stuff like that. So for me, it feels like I'm over it, frankly. Like I'm over pastels. And I'm definitely like looking towards something else. And I really am more interested in installation work now and how ceramics interacts with installation and how you know, that'll take me. And I'm really hoping for it to be a little bit more monumental. So because like there's only so much stuff the kiln could do that I'm really interested in putting like parts together and seeing how that goes. So
Can I make another comment before I forget? I won't take too much time, I promise, everyone. I think that there's this pressure of like always thinking, what's next in your work? Like, what's the next piece? And I feel like sometimes that can be so paralyzing because we tend to be put, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to speak for everyone else, but you put that pressure of like, oh my God, people are, I guess it depends on you, of course, like, people are getting tired of like looking at the same things and this and that. And I feel that it's both terrifying and paralyzing and really not that useful. at least for me as an artist, because it's of course we have things to say with our work and we want to put it out there, and we're happy to share the things that we want to say, and we're happy to, at least I am always happy when somebody looks at it and they take something away from it, even if it has nothing to do with what I intended. That's, I'm okay with that. So I think, yeah, it's just like having that constant pressure of thinking like, so where did you see it going? And like, where it's like, I don't know where I'm going. I mean, I like usually, it's like there's like all these things that like you might have a plan for it, but life will take you because of a lack of access to things, or when like whether that is money, is space, yada yada. You don't really know where that's gonna go, or where you're gonna go necessarily. So that was my comment.
With me, I feel like my work's kind of guiding in a direction where I might be going a little more like digital in a sense. So whether it's like drawing on Illustrator and then doing like decal work and things like that, but I'm also kind of traditional in a sense where it comes from sort of like engaging with the material and doing it all by hand. So I have recently been doing some work that is less focusing on the form, focusing more in a sense of like abstract work, or not abstract, but like functional work that I obviously know that I can make, but not really focusing on the surface too much and having control over that. So doing more like slip drawings and whether it's working with like underglazes and like I said, decals and things. So I don't see myself right now like changing like the concept, sort of these intuitive forms that are inspired by like the body and like machines and things, but definitely transitioning from using my hands less and possibly using more tools, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For sure. Like the one in your hand that you were just drinking?
Yeah, this sort of cup.
Which, not to push back, I think your hand is probably even more involved, bro.
It is.
And
it is. You know how long that took me?
I was gonna say the amount of posts you were making on the big, I was like, I don't know, maybe your hand has actually been upped,
But that's just what I like. Like if I'm not engaging with it, like I get bored. I gotta find like all the levels. It just hits everything.
I think if anything, you're just maybe kind of coming up with another combination of how the hand and the machine are met, because you're still throwing the forms and you're throwing these computer's dying, throwing these tight, objects, but now you're like getting really precise, no pun intended, with these line markings. So I don't know. It's more, not to say the animalistic way, but it's more than one way to peel a potato, and I think that maybe this fight looks different every time we approach it, and we think we're actually maybe running away from something, and yet we're actually running more towards it.
It's kind of, if you relate it to like all the different apps and things that you can get, you have people out there like creating, whether it's like filters and things, and you're like, okay, this is what we were given, this is all we can use. And now, they're sort of changing those platforms to where you have more control over that. You know what I mean? Like you can sort of use Instagram now, like Lightroom or something, because that's how, like, that's sort of what we need. I remember back to, sorry if I'm talking, but I remember back to like MySpace, like we had the code
Yep.
to like put all the things in.
Yo, everybody was a coder.
Yeah, like, you know, get that song on there and everything, and to your backgrounds and stuff. And like now, you know, it's all sort of given to us. All we got to do is just search, find, boom, done. You know, and I feel like for me, it's like, yo, I'm bored with that. Like, so if you can relate it to that.
For sure. Well, definitely thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to all the artists. Do like some jazz hands, some round of applause for all the amazing thoughts and ideas and conversations we were able to have tonight. I'm super excited for how this continues. I want to give a special thank you to Brian Harper, everyone on Art Access, as well as the Color Network for being super supportive for this idea. I'm pretty sure none of you guys really probably had this in mind as an outcome, but I'm really thankful we were all able to work together. So definitely, if you guys go to the Art Access website, again, you can find all of the artists' social media as well as websites. If you would like to continue to reach out to them and talk to them, you know, get these artists booked and busy, you know, don't let them this be their last exhibition, you know. So but yeah, thank you so much. As we close out, artists, can you just stay on as everybody leaves, just so I can personally thank you guys. But thank you everyone so much. Have a great one.